Good morning, and thank you for having me in Diabetes Morocco 2024. My name is Naima MOUSTAID MOUSSA. I'm a distinguished professor in the Department of Nutritional Sciences and serve also as director of the Obesity Research Institute. And most recently, I took on the role of executive director of a new institute for One Health Innovation at Texas Tech University. So today we'll share some overview about nutrition and obesity, and of course how it relates to diabetes and other metabolic diseases, and specifically some examples of protective anti-inflammatory mechanisms of dietary bioactive compounds in obesity, diabetes, and other metabolic diseases. Make sure that it's recording. Okay. So first I will talk about obesity, just an overview of inflammation, how it relates to obesity and metabolic diseases, the different types of adipose tissues and their roles in metabolic diseases. And then I will move on various ways that dietary bioactive compounds, some of them can reduce inflammation in white fat, increase browning, and change gut microbiota, some of the mechanisms that may be beneficial in obesity and diabetes. So first, I would like to thank my lab, who contributes significantly to the work that we do, and also funding from the National Institutes of Health, United States Department of Agriculture, the American Heart Association, and Perker Foods Incorporated for some of the food work we do, and Qatar Foundation for some work related to diabetes and fatty liver disease. So moving on to obesity, as you know, obesity is an epidemic worldwide. And here I show the global map with the prevalence of obesity as shown by the key to the right. The darkest the color, the darkest the color as blue, the higher is the prevalence of obesity. And you can see here, of course, in the US, we have 42% of the adult population that suffers from obesity, but also we have other areas in South America, but also in Africa or Australia that are affected by obesity. So this is in men, and if you compare to prevalence of obesity in women, you can see that more dark blue colors are appearing. That means higher prevalence of obesity in women, especially in some parts of North Africa. You can see significantly increased prevalence of obesity in women. How about the United States? It's a different picture. We don't see specifically great differences between male and females, no huge sex differences. However, we see ethnic differences in obesity prevalence. For example, in non-Hispanic white adults, here is the key. Again, you will see that darker red colors indicate higher prevalence of obesity, and on average in non-Hispanic white adults, we have around 35 to 40% prevalence of obesity. Now, if you move on to Hispanic adults, you can see that the map is more red. That means higher prevalence of obesity. It goes to up to 50%. In non-Hispanic Black adults, African Americans, the prevalence goes on to even 50%. The same applies to non-Hispanic American, Indian, or Alaska native adults. You can see many states here shown with the dark red and white dots to have high prevalence of obesity. So we have health disparities in this area of metabolic disease. The same applies to diabetes as well. So obesity is a complex metabolic disease, and we need to address it because it's associated with severe medical complications. Obesity almost affects every organ in our body. It can lead to atherosclerosis. The higher your BMI, the higher your risk to develop dyslipidemia or diabetes, certain types of cancer, fatty liver diseases, or even cirrhosis, even brain diseases, sleep apnea, inflammation everywhere, including in the joints. And specifically, you see high accumulation of fat. It really affects those organs that are around it. Now, just to introduce adipose tissue, for some of you who may not be familiar, there are different types of adipose tissues. When we talk about obesity, it's really the white adipose tissue that expands. It stores high amounts of lipids as triglycerides, but it also has inflammatory effects, and it's dynamic endocrine organ. On the other hand, we have the brown fat. Let me move this. The brown fat is rich in mitochondria, small lipid droplets, and it has a specialized protein that is called uncoupled protein 1 or UCP1 that helps generate heat, but also burn fat, especially fatty acids. More recently, maybe a dozen years ago or more, a new fat or new adipose tissue was discovered. It's actually white fat that generates subcutaneous fat locations. And it's called beige or bright fat. So it's brown-like fat, and it has similar properties in burning energy and generating heat. And these are some examples of the location where you can find the white and brown fat. The brown fat is mostly around the neck, subclavicular area. And the white fat is throughout the body, but mostly in the abdominal area, epicardiac, retroperitoneal, gonadal fat are the white adipose tissues, especially the visceral fat areas. For the subcutaneous fat, it's mostly in the gluteal and femoral area. And these are the fats that are able also to develop into beige fat. So now moving on to, again, how obesity is associated with metabolic diseases. And obesity can lead to what is called the metabolic syndrome, which is a cluster of conditions that include hyperglycemia, diabetes, of course, abdominal obesity, dyslipidemia with high triglycerides, high blood pressure. In general, when you have the metabolic syndrome, you're likely to have underlying conditions such as high inflammation and high thrombosis. We focus mostly on inflammation for our research, and inflammation is an underlying feature in many metabolic diseases and can lead to or increase the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. Here are some examples of how inflammation in adipose tissue, when it expands, can connect to diabetes. So when adipose tissue expands, immune cells, specifically macrophages, infiltrate in the adipose tissue, M1 inflammatory macrophages, and this leads to production of cytokines by these immune cells, but also some cell types in adipose tissue, including adipocytes and stem cells. So these cytokines, such as interleukin-6 or TNF-alpha, interfere with insulin signaling. Actually, they block the insulin signaling pathways. I won't get into these details, but as a result, insulin is less effective in doing what? It's less effective in blocking the liver glucose production. So this leads to more glucose produced by liver through gluconeogenesis and leading to higher circulating chronically high levels of glucose. And this will affect the ability of muscle to utilize glucose when insulin is not effective. In addition, by having less effective insulin or decreased response to insulin, the adipose tissue is going to break down more of those lipids and triglycerides through lipolysis. Insulin normally blocks lipolysis, but when we have insulin resistance and less effective insulin, this leads to increased circulating fatty acid that then deposit in various organs, including muscle, where then it competes with glucose, blocks utilization of glucose, and may lead to insulin resistance. So for these reasons, really just expanding adipose tissue and inflammation can negatively affect insulin effect and, of course, diabetes outcomes. So now moving on to bioactive compounds. So there are several of them. These are not micronutrients or macronutrients. So these are extra nutritional constituents, phytochemicals that are biologically active. There is significant research going on in this area, many health benefits, but also many claims. Not all are scientifically evidenced through research, but many of them have promising roles, therapeutic roles in diabetes or in disease prevention in general. Our lab has focused primarily on fish oil. We also worked with turmeric or curcumin, and with top cherry rich in anthocyanins. And we have shown through various mechanisms these can actually reduce obesity and also insulin resistance. through various mechanisms. So one of the mechanisms, of course, these compounds can affect various signaling, cell signaling mechanisms. But on the other hand, these bioactive compounds, for example, anthocyanidins from cherries, are metabolized by gut bacteria and converted into different compounds, for example, cyanidins into protocatechuic acid, or quercetin into DHPA metabolite, curcumin into tetrahydrocurcumin, and so on. So these bioactive compounds can be metabolized by the gut and produce new metabolites that can have health benefits. For example, we have also fish oil that is rich in icosapentaenoic acid, EPA, or docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA, and these can be metabolized through enzymatic or non-enzymatic mechanisms into resolvins and protectins that are highly effective in reducing or resolving inflammation. This is just an example of some of the work that we have done with fish oil and its anti-obesity and anti-inflammatory mechanisms. Here we use mainly for our research mice that are induced to become obese and diabetic with high-fat diet, high-caloric diet. And when we supplement these diets with fish oil can activate brown fat, some more fatty acid oxidation, can block fatty acid synthesis or adipogenesis and lipogenesis in adipose tissue, leading to smaller adipocyte. That means reducing adipocyte hypertrophy. And when you do so, you have less inflammation, risk recruitment of macrophages into adipose tissue, which means less circulating cytokines, and that can significantly reduce inflammation, improve insulin action. We have also identified various mechanisms, such as microRNAs, that can mediate these mechanisms, or lipid mediators, such as leukotrienes through 5-lipoxygenase, that can also mediate the effects of fish oil in metabolic diseases. So I will stop here, and I hope that I have conveyed the importance of adipose tissue in many metabolic conditions and diseases, either through blocking inflammation in white adipose tissue, activating brown fat, browning the white adipose tissue, or beiging of white adipose tissue, but also through metabolism of some of the bioactive compounds that we consume in our diet by gut bacteria, and through affecting cell signaling, regulation of cell signaling by these bioactive compounds that can improve metabolic conditions. So again, thank you for having me here. And this is my email, naima.mousstaid-moussa@ttut.edu. I'll be happy to take any questions. If you have them, feel free to contact me.